Hello, dreamers, and welcome to the 320th episode of Killafornia Dreaming. Before we get into today's case, I have a few notes about this show. This is an independent ad-free podcast that is fully listener supported, and there are a few ways that you can help me keep producing episodes. You can follow the show on social media, and while you're at it, I'd appreciate it if you'd also follow the social medias of my other hustle, which is Costa Oil Las Vegas. I spend 7 mornings a week getting there to the shop, getting it ready for the day, and then I hide in my office and I'm working on the show. So if you support Costa Oil, you're supporting this podcast. So if you see me posting about the shop, please give it a follow on Instagram and on Facebook. If you happen to come to town and you come through the shop, you got to give it a good review. We're really trying to establish ourselves here as a local, small, woman-owned business. So please come out and support. But anyway, getting back to the podcast, please follow the show on Facebook, Instagram, X, TikTok, all the places. Leave a nice rating and a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, on YouTube. Comment, follow, do all the things. Everything helps. Wherever you leave nice comments, 5 stars, it will give us a boost. And if you're feeling ambitious and need more content to listen to when you're relaxing at home with nothing else to listen to, please subscribe to Patreon for Killafornia Dreaming. Now that I'm settled here in my office, I'm going to move most of my mailing stuff, all the gifts that I give to patrons, over here, and I'm going to try to catch up on sending out perks for everybody. I have some thank yous to give. I'm going to try to do that in the next episode. It's just been kind of slow on Patreon. I could really use a little bit of love over there. So if you have an extra $1 or so a month, subscribe, get some more content to listen to, and support small businesses everywhere. All right. I think that covers everything. Let's get started with today's episode. In the summer of 2023, most of us were basically sitting around and we were minding our own business when all of a sudden we started hearing rumblings of some sort of submersible craft that had set off from Newfoundland, Canada to explore the wreckage of the Titanic. The Titanic, as you know, sunk 111 years, 2 months, and some change ago, prior to the unfolding of this story. Not today, but to when this story started. Most of us were enjoying that Sunday when this whole thing began, and it did happen to be Father's Day here in the United States. And I would even go so far as to say that most of us didn't even really know anything about this submersible vessel to begin with prior to this. And I'm like that with a lot of things in this world. I usually don't hear about different or unusual things like taking voyages in a little submersible to the Titanic unless something goes egregiously wrong. And that is precisely why we are here today talking about this. And you know what? I'm just going to give you a warning. I'm not really all that nice or sympathetic to OceanGate and to its CEO, Stockton Rush, who is the main subject of this story. So, I mean, I'm not going to try to make light of anybody's doom, but I mean, come on. What else can you do, right? So, before we start talking about this submersible and all of the absurdity surrounding it, I want to talk a little bit about CEOs gone wild, because what's been going on with these crazy executive officers lately, because it all kind of seemed to kick off last December. It was actually on my 50th birthday, no less, when United Healthcare Systems CEO Brian Thompson was shot and killed in Manhattan by a disgruntled yet wildly popular young man named Luigi Maggioni. Ever since then, it seems like it's been open season on CEOs, and in some instances, these executives are sort of kind of taking themselves out. Not everyone is targeted and assassinated the way Brian Thompson was, or more recently, Charlie Kirk, who was the CEO of Turning Point USA. He was assassinated September 10th of 2025 at a speaking event on a college campus in Orem, Utah. In fact, on the day that I was actually writing this, which was October 14th, is when I started thinking about doing this episode, that would have been Charlie Kirk's 32nd birthday. So in my poking around on the internet, I found several articles about the seemingly unusual uptick in high-profile CEO deaths in recent months, even in the last year or two. The man at the center of our story was a CEO, but he also has the distinction and is probably the only person ever in history to be able to say this to be fact. But the CEO we're going to talk about today, Stockton Rush, has the distinction of assassinating 2 billionaires while he was up to all of this Titan submersible tomfoolery. So I mentioned Brian Thompson, the United Healthcare CEO, who was shot to death by Maggioni last December, and Charlie Kirk, who was shot to death, assassinated in September. While these two were targeted and literally assassinated, there are CEOs who have been met with unfortunate accidental deaths. These are people of means, people who have money. They tend to live these lifestyles where they participate in fun, recreational activities in their spare time, and sometimes things just don't end well. Like, I ran across an article about a thing that just happened, a couple weeks ago to the CEO of LendingTree, Doug Lebda. He died on his family farm in North Carolina on October 12th in a, quote, all-terrain vehicle accident. Doug founded LendingTree in 1996 after he had a hard time with the frustrations and complexities of getting his own first home mortgage. So I found another article that was published in the New York Post on August 5th, 2025 that reads, Tech CEO Thomas Bredis killed in freak mid-air crash with pal while skydiving. The daredevil CEO of a Brazilian tech company was killed in a freak accident as he collided mid-air with a friend who was skydiving with him. Thomas Bredis, the 44-year-old chief of fiber optics company Volui, V-O-L-U-I, Volui, I don't know how to pronounce it, I'm so sorry, Telecom, leapt out of a small plane in southern Brazil on Saturday and was struck in the head by his friend's knee as they were both free-falling toward the ground, officials told Brazilian news outlet G1. Their parachutes deployed, but Bredis lost control and crashed in a field away from the landing area. He was rushed to a local hospital, but died from his injuries. The next guy I remember hearing about, now he wasn't a CEO, but he was described in an article that I read about him on NDT.com dated August 11th, 2025, as a Texas businessman. But either way, people with too much time and money on their hands, they like doing wild and crazy things, right? So this article, and all the articles I'm quoting are listed in the show notes, by the way. So the article said, Texas businessman dies after buffalo attack during South African hunting safari. A Texas businessman was fatally attacked by a Cape buffalo during a hunting expedition in South Africa's Limpopo province on Sunday, according to the safari company that organized the trip. Asher Watkins, 52, died while tracking a 1.3-ton Cape buffalo when the animal unexpectedly turned and charged at him at approximately 35 miles an hour, according to a statement sent to multiple news outlets. Asher was fatally injured in a sudden and unprovoked attack by an unwounded buffalo he was tracking with one of our professional hunters and one of our trackers. The safari company's CEO wrote in a statement released on Monday. That's what he said. Attacked by an unwounded buffalo is tracking with one of our professional hunters and one of our trackers. Watkins served as managing partner at Watkins Ranch Group, which maintains affiliations with Briggs Freeman and LIV Slotsby International. He was described as someone who spent most of his time outdoors and on ranches. He was a proud and devoted father. The article also said, Cape buffalo are among Africa's most dangerous game animals, according to warnings posted on the CBS website. The massive bovines are known for their unpredictable behavior and aggressive nature when threatened or pursued. Yeah, so dreamers, this should not be a shock or surprise to anybody based on the fact that these buffalo are known to be unpredictable and aggressive when this guy and his guides are doing exactly the thing that causes said buffalo to become unpredictable and aggressive. It actually feels more predictable than anything else. If there are warning signs that these buffaloes are unpredictable, isn't that predictable in and of itself? The story that made some pretty big headlines earlier in 2025 was the CEO of Siemens in Spain, Agustin Escobar. He was killed along with his wife and 3 children in a helicopter crash over the Hudson River. The pilot of that helicopter was also killed. And if I'm not mistaken, there was a video of the helicopter going down and splashing into the river. You can also, I think it started to fall apart too midair. The family had traveled to New York, the Escobar family, from Barcelona for vacation. The exact cause of the helicopter crash in the Hudson River at this time that I'm recording this is still under investigation, but a preliminary report from the NTSB indicates that the aircraft broke apart midair. So I remember seeing the footage of some of the parts coming off the helicopter as it plummeted from the sky. The tail boom is believed to have failed, causing the main rotor system to detach and the helicopter to break into pieces. Experts suggested that a possible cause for the failure could be mast bumping, where rotor blades are excessively flapping, causing the hub to contact the rotor mast, and everything else just kind of falls apart after that. So in an article, moving on to the next thing, the next CEO, in an article on ndtv.com dated June 24th, 2025, had the headline that read, U.S. healthcare CEO 46 found dead in Baltimore hotel, family suspects murder. Nicholas Manning, CEO of HCA Healthcare's West Valley Medical Center, was found dead in his hotel room earlier this month. According to People magazine, cops responded to a reported potential overdose at the Baltimore Marriott waterfront on June 6th. Once at the scene, officers found the 46-year-old dead. They said that there were no signs of trauma on the victim's body. They also stated that Mr. Manning's body was taken to the medical examiner's office to determine the cause of death. An investigation is still ongoing. Mr. Manning was traveling for business when he died. Even though the police responded to a possible overdose, his family said that they do not believe his death was an accident. Mr. Manning's family claims that they have evidence that he was a victim of fraud and a homicide. However, officials have not shared any information to substantiate the family's claim, saying the probe is ongoing. An article on CBS.com said that the Idaho CEO's cause of death was methamphetamine intoxication, and the manner of death is undetermined. I found another executive who was killed in the mass shooting that took place on July 28, 2025 at the Park Avenue offices of Blackstone Real Estate Income Trust. So it wasn't a case of death by misadventure like the previous couple of executives that I mentioned. The article that I read on BusinessInsider.com said that the shooting at 345 Park Avenue on Monday left 4 victims dead. Blackstone said in a statement that real estate executive Wesley LePatner was among those killed in the NYC shooting. A star executive in Blackstone's real estate, LePatner, 43 years old, was the $1.2 trillion firm's global head of Core Plus Real Estate and CEO of Blackstone Real Estate Income Trust. I don't think I ever heard of any company being worth $1 trillion, but okay. The shooter was a 27-year-old who took his own life after the shooting and was still inside the skyscraper located on the 33rd floor when he ended his life. I found an article in the dailymail.co.uk from yesterday as I wrote this episode. It was dated October 16th, so I must have been typing all this stuff up on the 15th. Oh, wait. 17th. Sorry. I'm tired. The other way around. So I wrote this on the 17th. The article from the dailymail.co.uk was on the 16th. Former Aviva CEO David Burrell is killed in a fireball crash after Aston Martin plows into tree. A former Aviva CEO boss David Burrell has died in a fireball crash after his Aston Martin veered off the road and collided with a tree. His family has now paid tribute to the 63-year-old businessman following his death, which occurred near Wetherby in West Yorkshire. He was driving a grey Aston Martin DBX SUV when the crash happened on the A58 Leeds Road between Bardsley and Collingham shortly after 2 p.m. on Tuesday. Aviva is a British multinational insurance company headquartered in London. And I found another one. This one I read about in People magazine. The CEO of Mango, which is a multinational fashion retailer from Spain, founded in 1984 by brothers Isaac and Naaman Andic. On December 14th, 2024, while on a hiking trip, Isaac, who was 71 years old at the time, fell 350 feet to his death. He was hiking with his son, Jonathan. So this has recently turned into a possible homicide investigation, as it has been reported that Isaac's relationship with his son had soured and they weren't close. Police allege that some of the son's statements about the fall were inconsistent with what investigators found at the scene. This article in People literally just published that the day that I was writing this episode, at least at this point. So closing in on a year since the CEO's death. And as of now, the family is standing by Jonathan, the son, who's being suspected of having caused his father's fall. And I found yet another CEO that was murdered in 2025. In an article in CDL Life dated March 18th, 2025 read, recently released court records show that the CEO, who was allegedly murdered by his own driver, owed the man a, quote, substantial amount of money. The 46-year-old ATG truckload CEO, Dane Koteski, was found lying face down in a pool of blood in his office as it burned on March 5th in Crestwood, Illinois. On Sunday, March 16th, 53-year-old Joseph Sucklia, a truck driver for ATG, was charged with first-degree murder for the incident. Sucklia was a long-time truck driver for ATG, and Koteski had recently told him that ATG was going bankrupt. Koteski also, quote, owed a substantial amount of money to Sucklia, but was unable to pay him. Security footage showed Sucklia following Koteski into the company office at 2:37 p.m. on March 5th. Koteski is then seen stepping into another room to take a phone call, and Sucklia follows him. There was then allegedly a brief struggle, and then crying is heard from the room. Koteski can be heard asking why, and Sucklia is heard responding, "I had to." The person Koteski was on the phone with described hearing scuffling and muffled sounds, and then the phone went dead. Sucklia fled the scene in one of the company's trucks, which was traced to a truck stop in Holland, Michigan, where he was arrested. He had a large knife, and there was blood on the steering wheel and floorboards of the truck. It was later determined that Kuteski's throat had been slit. So, dreamers, I keep finding more and more executives who have died kind of recently, but aren't making as much news as maybe outside of their local area, I should say. Thomas Perkins and his wife, Agatha, were longtime residents of Middletown, Rhode Island. Active, well-known members of the community, volunteers with local causes, all the good stuff, right? They were killed in a small plane crash that landed onto Interstate 195 in Dartmouth, Massachusetts, just this past week, as I wrote that, on October 13th. Thomas Perkins, along with his brother-in-law, Jerry Kirby, were partners at Kirby Perkins Construction of Middletown. The crash happened around 8:15 in the morning and resulted in a fire on the ground. Nobody else on the ground was killed, but a Hyundai was impacted in some manner as a result of the plane crash, and that driver was taken to a local hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. There was apparently a strong nor'easter at the time, but it is not known if that contributed to the crash. So yeah, there's been some notable deaths in the 1% over the years. So normally, I've paid close attention to like celebrity death watches, a list of notable people and celebrities who are most likely to die each year. Well, in recent months, I've found myself keeping an eye on these company executives, these wealthy types, these elites, dying in kind of interesting and unusual, unnatural ways. While those hovering with the elites in the 1%, while they've had interesting deaths, whether it be something like indulging in excessiveness or perhaps doing some thrill seeking, the one that I followed very closely that kind of kicked off CEO season for me, and for a lot of us followed this, was the gentleman at the center of our story today, Richard Stockton Rush III, founder and CEO of OceanGate, a deep-sea exploration company and manufacturer of submersible watercraft. At the time that the story that we're going to talk about today took place, OceanGate owned 3 submersibles, the Antipodes, the Cyclops 1, and the Titan. The first 2, Antipodes and Cyclops, were older vessels and described as being rated for shallower depths. The Titan was the company's newest submersible, and while Stockton Rush acted like it was rated to the depths of where the Titanic wreckage rests at the bottom of the North Atlantic, none of these submersibles that belonged to OceanGate had any business going anywhere near Titanic. Stockton Rush pretended that Titan was absolutely meant to be at that incredible depth of 12,500 feet. That's 2.5 miles, almost 4 kilometers down. Stockton Rush was sending that submersible Titan 12 and a half times deeper than his other 2 vessels without a care in the world. Going down there like he's playing a video game. I mean, right? He had a video game controller for his submersible. That's what he drove the thing with, right? Making things so simple that a teenager can manage it. Oh, I could sit here all day and talk smack on this guy and his hubris. Hubris. That's what we hear a lot when we talk about this man. It's from the Greek word for pride, insolence, outrage, and it means extreme or excessive pride or dangerous overconfidence and complacency. So there are a bunch of videos about this story on YouTube, and for some reason, all of them seem to be, or most of them seem to be narrated by British or Australian people. So we know a lot about this case and how it happened, where it all started with Stockton Rush being born into a prominent family, descendants of the signers of the Declaration of Independence or something along those lines. So he's a thoroughbred, right? A bored rich guy that had dreams of flight, but because of his terrible eyesight, he was never able to make it as a pilot, so he would eventually turn his sights to the depths of the ocean. Billionaires and pop stars are going to space every other day these days, right? That's so like last year. Stockton saw the bottom of the ocean as untapped territory, and he wanted a way to make diving to the bottom of the ocean available to the average, everyday, wealthy, eccentric thrill seeker. And after all that had been said and done and investigated, it's become pretty clear that Stockton Rush knew that he was gambling with people's lives. But the way he went about it, with so much bluster and pomposity, that I have no choice but to create an entire episode criticizing everything this man did that led to the tragic implosion of the Titan 2 summers ago. The thing that Stockton wanted was to not only make travel to the Titanic more readily accessible to people who were really fascinated with the sunken ocean liner, but for more than just one person to be able to go at a time. Prior to the Titan submersible making the trip with multiple passengers on board, as far as I know, the very, very few people who have been to the wreckage site went by themselves in a small, round submersible. It was really the only way to get there and make it back. The shape, size, and strength is what was needed in order to withstand the tremendous pressures of being that deep in the ocean, and nothing less. Stockton's idea was to make a submersible that was cylindrical instead of round, so more people could travel at one time. But that went against what all the world's leading experts and engineers and scientists and whomever else was involved in developing a vessel that could withstand the pressures at those depths. If they told Stockton once, they told him 100 times, the safest shape for a submersible is round. It's just science. Anything elongated into a cylindrical shape such as the Titan leaves it vulnerable to being crushed like an aluminum can. I can see Stockton brushing that aside as a bunch of bored cynics who allow fear and proven research to limit progress and innovation. He basically thumbed his nose at everybody and was like, I'm a millionaire. My parents named me Stockton, so I'm probably a dick. My papa signed the Declaration of Independence, and that makes me like the mayor of America, and I get to do whatever I feel like doing. But my problem with this dude is he had to take 4 people with him. And when I first heard about this story, I was kind of cynical about it too. I was kind of like, well, if these people just had to go down to see the Titanic for themselves just because, and this is how their story ended, then oh well. I sympathize with the families who lost loved ones though, for sure. It was such a preventable thing. But when you do stuff like travel to one of the most unforgiving places on earth, you might die, which is why 77-year-old French underwater explorer and Titanic expert Paul-Henri Nargeolet, 58-year-old British businessman Hamish Harding, 48-year-old British Pakistani businessman Shahzada Dawood, and his 19-year-old son Suleiman all signed that so-called death waiver. I was curious as to what the waiver said. I actually never looked at it prior to this, but they made sure to get the fact that death was possible very clear on the very first page of it, and big chunks of the waiver are all printed in all caps. Some of it's in bold, some of it's italicized, some of it's all 3. The whole thing should be all 3 actually, or just 3 words. You'll probably die, sign here. They put their faith in Stockton and in the Titan as well, as the vessel had by then made several successful trips to the site of the Titanic wreckage. But that seems to be a little fuzzy too. The number of times the Titan made the dive to the Titanic it varies from depending on what article you're reading. When I Googled it, the answer that was generated said that it made 3 successful dives all the way there between 2021 and 2022. However, it's also been reported that it completed at least 13 successful dives to the Titanic before this tragic accident, with some sources suggesting that it may have carried passengers on at least 10 trips in total. So it kind of sounds like OceanGate and Stockton Rush tried to keep what they were doing somewhat secret. So, the death waiver. Actually, the whole waiver is in italicized font now that I look at it again. So it says, I, insert name here, acknowledge that I have voluntarily applied to participate in the Titanic survey expedition arranged by OceanGate Expeditions, a company registered in the Bahamas. So yeah, use every single legal loophole to circumvent all industry classifications, standards, guidelines, and best practices governing watercraft that travel to unregulated parts of the world that you can find, put into one sentence without telling me you're using every single legal loophole to circumvent all industry classifications, standards, guidelines, and best practices governing watercraft to travel to unregulated parts of the world. In short, Stockton Rush literally hired these volunteers, since he used the word applied. They applied to participate in this Titanic survey, which technically gives them the official, unofficial title of mission specialist. And since they are on paper as such, they're working. Because if they were paying customers, OceanGate would be subject to legal repercussions if any incidents occurred during the expedition. The wording was used to protect OceanGate from potential legal problems as it is considered illegal to transport passengers in an unclassed experimental submersible. The utilization of the term mission specialist was purely a marketing strategy to market trips to the Titanic wreck as a, quote, high-stakes mission focused on research, unquote, despite the fact that everyone paid $250,000 for the experience to ride on a thing that cost about $12 million to build. So the waiver continued. The expedition will embark from Newfoundland, Canada. From there, participants will travel for the most part aboard non-United States flagged vessels. The expedition will be conducted largely in international waters. And here we go again, another loophole. For a guy who was so flippant about taking people to probably die, he sure as shit made sure to cover his own ass and his estate, apparently. I read a really good article on Smithsonian.com that wrote about Stockton and the Titan submersible back in 2019, with a headline that read, "A deep dive into the plan to take tourists to the Titanic." And in that article, the author, who went on what he called a test dunk in the Titan off the coast of Everett, Washington, wrote about how Stockton's interest in submersible watercraft came to be. And you know, as I read this guy's article, I realized Stockton's behaviors, actions, and reactions to things were always a result of being told what he can't do, such as being a pilot. This article hailed Stockton as a real pioneer. And I'll link it in the show notes. It said, in his zeal for innovation, Rush stands out even in the elite manned submersible community, which attracts wealthy, eccentric individuals willing to risk their fortunes on wildly uncertain endeavors. Rush wants to do for deep ocean exploration what Richard Branson, Jeff Bezos, and Elon Musk are doing for space travel. By taking well-heeled tourists to the deep, Rush hopes to use private enterprise to spur advances in the long-neglected field of underwater exploratory technology and reveals some of the secrets of the great blue unknown. The article went on to talk about how there was a push for underwater exploration after the moon landing in 1969, and that the U.S. military at the time was pumping tremendous amounts of money into manned submersibles. But after the end of the Vietnam War and the country went into a recession, the government was no longer putting money into manned subs and funneled funds into contractors and using sonar, unmanned crafts, and robotics instead of sending people into the depths of the ocean. And here we go again. We come to Stockton being told no, and instead of accepting that, he worked hard at working around it. As the article said, quote, soon after the private market dried up too, Rush found for two reasons that were understandable but illogical. First, subs gained a reputation for danger, working on offshore rigs in harsh conditions like the North Sea. Saturation divers who breathe gas mixtures to avoid diving sickness would be taken in subs to work at great depths. It was the world's most perilous job with frequent fatalities. It wasn't the sub's fault, says Rush. To save lives, the industry moves towards using underwater robots to perform the same work. Second, tour subs, which could once be skippered by anyone with a U.S. Coast Guard captain's license, were regulated by the Passenger Vessel Safety Act of 1993, which imposed rigorous new manufacturing and inspection requirements and prohibited dives below 150 feet. The law was well-meaning, Rush says, but he believes it needlessly prioritized passenger safety over commercial innovation. There hasn't been an injury in the commercial sub industry in over 35 years. It's obscenely safe because they have all these regulations. But it also hasn't innovated or grown because they have all these regulations. The U.S. government, meanwhile, has continued to favor space exploration over ocean research. NASA today, in 2019, gets about $10.5 billion annually for exploration. Office of Ocean Exploration and Research is allotted less than $50 million. A triumph of emotion over logic, Rush says. Half of the United States is underwater, and we haven't even mapped it. Okay, so yeah, Stockton Rush is a man of many words. Too many words, if you ask me. We're talking about a guy who literally said, trust me, bro, I'm an engineer. He may not have said the bro part, but he did say, trust me, I'm an engineer. This article was actually a good read, especially in hindsight now that the Titan is no more. And it's kind of ominous, as one of the lines in the article read, there's only one catch to Rush's plan. He still had to prove that Titan could safely get down to the site. Getting back to the waiver, I keep stopping to be critical and judge, and I've only gotten through the first 2 sentences of this thing. No wonder these episodes take me forever to put together. It's too much shit talking, which is fun, but let's just keep going. The waiver said, the ship wreckage of the RMS Titanic lies at a depth of approximately 3,800 meters and is approximately 380 nautical miles south-southeast off the coast of Newfoundland. I have been informed about the nature of the expedition and the risk it represents, including that 1. The expedition includes activities involving subsurface vessels and or remotely operated vessels that are on, near, or under the water. For purposes of this agreement, the expedition shall also be deemed to include transit to and from the point of embarkation that may be arranged or coordinated directly or indirectly by the released parties, training, or other physical preparation in conjunction with these activities contemplated herein, and any post-voyage events I may participate in related to the activities contemplated herein. I hate reading legal stuff. Number 2, a portion of the expedition will be conducted inside an experimental submersible vessel that will dive 3,800 meters to the shipwreck of the Titanic. The experimental submersible vessel has not been approved or certified by any regulatory body and is constructed of materials that have not been widely used for manned submersibles. As of the date of this release, the experimental submersible vessel has conducted fewer than 90 dives, and 13 of those dives reached the depth of the Titanic. Prior to my participation in the expedition, there have been as few as 13 dives to Titanic depths in the submersible. Number 3, when diving below the ocean surface, this vessel will be subject to extreme pressure, and any failure of the vessel while I am aboard could cause me severe injury, disability, emotional trauma, or other harm and or death. I understand that I may decline to participate in any dive below the ocean surface or any activity of the expedition at any time. Number 4, The expedition support ship upon which I will be living for the duration of the expedition is an industrial vessel not specifically designed for passenger operations and has many hazards, including, without limitation, large/heavy objects, heavy swinging doors, and low overhangs. Many of these could become even more hazardous in heavy seas. I understand the expedition will occur in an uncontrollable natural setting, and the oceanic, atmospheric, and/or biological conditions present are unpredictable and beyond the control of the released parties. In addition, during the expedition, I may board small vessels and other equipment that could expose me to property damage, injury, disability, or death. So basically what I'm hearing is you're probably going to die, and if it isn't the Titan that does you in, then something else could, but it'll probably be the Titan. That's what I'm hearing. Number 5. If I choose to assist in the servicing or operation of the submersible vessel, I will be exposed to risks associated with high pressure gases, pure oxygen servicing, high voltage electrical systems, and other dangers that could lead to property damage, injury, disability, emotional harm, or death of myself or others. Number 6. The expedition will take place largely in international waters at great distance from the nearest hospital or rescue personnel. If I am injured during the expedition, I may not receive immediate medical attention. First aid available on the ship may not be equivalent to what is available on land. Number 7. I acknowledge that all travel in and around the water vessel of any type, including submersibles, entails known and unanticipated risks that could result in physical injury, disability, emotional trauma, death, harm to myself or third parties, or damage to my property or property of others. Although OceanGate expeditions will take reasonable steps to provide me with adequate training, equipment, and skilled expedition personnel, I understand that all risks cannot be eliminated from any expedition. The risks remain despite training, and the presence of skilled expedition personnel include, without limitation, loss of footing, slips and falls on deck, particularly in inclement weather, harming from falling objects on non-passenger vessels, drowning, and malfunction and failure of the submersible, leading to death or serious injury or other physical or mental harm. Additional dangers may include the hazards of accident or illness in remote places without access to emergency medical facilities, and acts of God such as severe weather. Number 8. I acknowledge that representatives of OceanGate expeditions have been available to answer my questions and more fully explain to me the physical demands of the expedition, as well as the risks, hazards, and dangers associated with the expedition. I understand that the foregoing description of these risks is not complete and that other unanticipated inherent risks may occur. I am voluntarily participating in the expedition with full knowledge of the facts set forth above, including the described risks and known and unknown risks. I understand the inherent risks in the activities that will be undertaken during the expedition. Number 9, in consideration of my desire to participate in the expedition and as lawful consideration for being given the right to participate in the same, I, on behalf of myself, my heirs, distributes, assigns, guardians, personal representatives, estate executors, administrators, assigns, and for all members of my family, including minor children, hereinafter collectively releasor, hereby release, waive, and forever discharge OceanGate Expeditions and its owner, OceanGate Incorporated, and the list goes on and on. There's a bunch of entities and blah, 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 from all liabilities, actions, claims, demands, costs, losses, or expenses which I or my heirs, distributes, guardians, legal representatives, next of kin, members of my family, including minor children or assignees, may have against the released parties on account of injury to myself, or my property or resulting in my death arising out of or in any way connected with my participation in the expedition, including travel to and from the expedition site. I hereby assume full responsibility for the risk of bodily injury, disability, death, and property damage due to the negligence of any released party while involved in the expedition. I hereby assume the full responsibility for any and all of property damage, injury, disability, or death. Okay, and in bold and caps and italics. I am voluntarily participating in the aforementioned activity, and I am participating in the activity entirely at my own risk. I am aware of the risk associated with participating in this activity, which may include but are not limited to physical or psychological injury, pain, suffering, illness, disfigurement, temporary or permanent disability, including paralysis, economic or emotional loss, and death. I understand that these injuries or outcomes may arise from my own or others' negligence, conditions related to travel to or from the expedition, or from conditions at the expedition locations. Nonetheless, I assume all related risks, both known and unknown to me, of my participation in the expedition. There's some more fine print, etc., etc. The final part in all caps and bolds and italics still. I hereby acknowledge that I have carefully read this waiver and release and fully understand that it is a release of liability. I agree to voluntarily give up or waive any right that I otherwise have to bring a legal action for personal injury or property damage or any other loss which I or my heirs, guardians, executors, administrators, assignees, family members, or personal representatives may have. And the final line says, if any part of this release is deemed unenforceable, all parts shall be given full effect to the extent possible. This waiver and release agreement supersedes any and all previous oral or written promises or other agreements relating to the expedition. Any disputes related to or arising from either the expedition or this release shall be governed by the laws of the Bahamas. Any dispute arising from either the expedition or this release shall be resolved in the courts of the Bahamas. So yeah, way to get around everything, huh? So, guess what? All the things that waiver covered all happened on June 18th, 2023, around 3 p.m. GMT, which is Greenwich Mean Time. And while Greenwich Mean Time doesn't have the same origins as UTC, which is Coordinated Universal Time, it's kind of now being used interchangeably to mean the same thing. So that is what would make it here at the time that the implosion happened, 11 a.m. Pacific time here for us around here. And then you do the math across the rest of the country, okay? That was about the time that it is believed that the waiver's worries came true when the news broke that a submersible carrying 5 people, 5 people, went missing suddenly on its way to the Titanic wreckage site. This is when we all started watching and waiting and hoping that there was just some sort of loss of communication and that something could be done to find the Titan before the oxygen supply of the submersible was believed to have been carrying would run out. The time limitations on the oxygen came and went, and it wasn't too long after that we started to get word that debris believed to be from the Titan submersible had been found on the ocean floor, not far from where the Titanic came to rest 111 years earlier. After an extensive investigation, the U.S. Coast Guard released its findings. The primary contributing factors were inadequate design, certification, maintenance, and inspection processes for the Titan. And really, as Stockton Rush was the face of the operation, the responsibility for the lives lost, including his own, rests with him. Because trust him, bro, he's an engineer. We all know by now that Stockton wanted a submersible that stood apart from the pack. And he certainly achieved that, as it has the distinction of having been the only one to implode on itself, and took out a handful of millionaires and billionaires while he was at it. But what set the Titan apart was its unique cylindrical design, something Stockton specifically wanted in order to be able to carry more than one person at a time to the wreckage. In the past, submersibles were spherical, which distributes pressure evenly and is able to withstand the pressures of being deep in water, that deep in water. The submersible is subjected to somewhere around 3 tons per square inch. So since the Titan was oblong in shape, the distribution of that extreme pressure would be uneven, like squeezing an aluminum can. The size of the submersible, since it was bigger in order to hold more passengers, means more pressure would be exerted on the entire thing than a regular round submersible, especially in the middle part. Like I said, aluminum can. Once the news hit that Titan was missing, several individuals who used to be involved with or employed by OceanGate came forward in the media to say, hey, we tried to tell him. We tried warning Stockton that not only was the design and shape of the Titan incredibly unstable and dangerous, but also the materials the Titan was manufactured out of weakened with every bump, grind, and dive. Even towing it out to the dive site instead of hoisting it on board, the process of towing the Titan through the rough waters of the North Atlantic can and will impact the submersible's structural integrity. At the end of the day, it really didn't matter who Stockton got the submersible to the surface level site where they were eventually dived from. The life of the Titan was finite. Its days were numbered from the moment it was built. And from all that everyone has said about it who knew Stockton or were in his inner circle, he was very well aware of the warnings that were being issued by leading experts in the industry, but chose to look the other way. Stockton is quoted several times saying things that make it very clear he was not going to be deterred by facts and science. He would say stuff like, aside from trust me, I'm an engineer, to I've broken some rules to make this. I think I've broken them with logic and good engineering behind me. And you know what? That statement in and of itself is kind of the same mantra that Theranos and Elizabeth Holmes were operating under. The core idea for Theranos being fake it till you make it, for OceanGate and Stockton Rush, the core principle was more like, fuck it, you're gonna die anyway. He felt like if you died doing something that goes against every engineer and expert has found to be impossible, with an attitude of nothing is impossible, then you're a trailblazing pioneer. That's what Stockton's idea was. If you believe that nothing is impossible when you're being told with absoluteness that it's impossible, then you're a trailblazer. The rules Stockton Rush broke were basically all of them. Prior to Titan, submersibles were made out of solid metal, steel, usually titanium, which is just about the only material known to be able to withstand the pressures of the ocean. Titan was constructed out of carbon fiber, which is used in a variety of industries, aerospace, aircraft components, drones, satellites, because it's lightweight and efficient on fuel. In the automotive industry, high-performance car panels, frames, and interior parts improve performance and safety. Sports equipment, bicycles, golf clubs, tennis rackets, and archery because of its durability and lightweight properties. Medical devices, countless consumer goods, all sorts of things because of how durable, lightweight, and corrosive-resistant carbon fiber is. So, I watched a short video about the way carbon fiber is strong. It is strong in that it can handle being pulled very, very hard, but it is no good at being pushed on. Carbon fiber, you could tow a car with it, with a strand of it, but you could not push a car with that same strand because it just collapses in on itself. So that's essentially what you have here, sending this cylindrical vessel into the tremendous pressure of the depths of a 4 kilometers or so, about 3,800 meters. We have these strands of carbon fibers that make up the hull of this submersible being subjected to tons and tons of pressure. So it should have made sense to Stockton that when you're talking about carbon fiber, its strength is all in pulling, not being pushed on. Carbon fiber is also cheaper, and we saw that OceanGate was really, really anxious to start getting these paying volunteers on board in order to start making money, as the whole operation was turning into a money pit for Stockton. So a little bit more about the construction of the Titan. Aside from the carbon fiber hull, the end caps of the submersible were made out of titanium. So what we have going on here are two different materials that do not have the same compression and expansion rates. And those two materials needed to be connected to each other, which is a design in and of itself that would have significantly increased the likelihood of damage to the point where they would have to be bonded together and considered to be watertight. Over time, that bond would grow weaker and weaker, just as the carbon fiber itself did as well over time. At the depths that they were going, 4 kilometers down, the smallest leak that you could possibly imagine, a leak even smaller than the diameter of a human hair, would equal instantaneous disaster and death. On top of that, the submersible was being sent into the dark depths of the North Atlantic with no onboard GPS system, because GPS doesn't work underwater. They communicated with the support ship on the surface via text messages in order to get directions and navigating around. Used to steer the Titan submersible was a video game console controller from the GameStop, something that was criticized in the media once the Titan imploded. Prior to that, Stockton would be interviewed and almost bragged about how simple, cheap, and easy using a PlayStation or Xbox controller was versus the types of highly sophisticated technology, advanced computerized steering systems traditional submersibles typically use. The insides of traditional submersibles also usually had all sorts of bells and whistles and buttons and lights and switches, like crazy control panel type stuff, right? Like you would see on any kind of human-made, human-operated passenger vessel. The insides of the Titan were uncomfortably simple. But that's what Stockton wanted. If he could streamline the process of putting together a submersible and using simple parts from the Home Depot and the Hobby Lobby and the Dollar General, he could finally get this show on the road. He could start selling tickets for one-way trips to everybody's maker. And he could save money at the same time. I even heard in one of the videos that I watched about this that zip ties were used in at least one repair that had to be made to Titan. Obviously, the most significant failure of the Titan was the fact that it imploded, but prior to that, there were numerous other failures. There were repeated communication blackouts. There was one time Titan got lost for about 5 hours, a thruster malfunction causing Titan to spin uncontrollably. There was no emergency beacon, a battery malfunction which caused the Titan to have to be manually reattached to its lifting platform. The Titan once became stuck on the ocean floor, so the pilot had to manually release weights in order for it to resurface. One time the Titan partially sank at the pier it left from in Newfoundland. It ran out of battery power once while it was underwater. It was kept outdoors in extreme Newfoundland winter conditions for an extended period of time. The forward dome of the Titan once fell off. It failed to drop weights multiples of times. And the Titan's first pressure hull had been struck by lightning. It began to develop visible cracks. It showed signs of hull fatigue and was ultimately replaced in 2020. Of course, we know that every time the Titan made a dive, it came back a little bit more damaged than before. In all, the Coast Guard compiled a list of 118 equipment issues on the final version of the Titan in 2021 and in 2022, and these were only the problems that were found after the Titan began commercial operations. And now we've come to find that prior to being put out into service, OceanGate employees expressed their concerns over what they felt were shortcuts and jerry-rigged components in the engineering and design of the Titan. In order to get around all of the criticisms and naysayers, Stockton made all engineering in-house. In other words, He found people who were willing to ignore industry standards and best practices so things could just go with the flow. If people didn't agree or continued to raise concerns, they would be fired from OceanGate. Stockton and his company fostered a culture of fear and intimidation within OceanGate, very reminiscent of Elizabeth Holmes and Sonny Balwani over there at Theranos. The threat of being sued by Elizabeth very much instilled fear in her employees, as it did with OceanGate employees as well. Another thing Stockton did that Elizabeth also did was hire people who would just do what they said to do and not ask questions. But they also hired people who were just out of college, young and ambitious, people who have not yet been told that they can't do something and then came to believe that just some things are impossible. Stockton needed enough people to believe that it was possible to send this Titan submersible to the depths of the Titanic over and over again, as many times as humanly possible, as long as they crossed all their own T's and dotted all their own I's. All others be damned in their purgatory of their own stagnation, right? His ideology was simple. As long as you think it's possible, then it is. Just think it really, really super duper hard and it'll all work out. Experts in the industry understood this and accused Stockton of hiring children straight out of university who would dismiss warnings, red flags, facts, and science. In fact, one of OceanGate's former engineers who sued OceanGate after being terminated is on record having said, "I knew that hull would fail. It was an absolute mess. There were so many laminations, so many voids. The imperfections were incredible. There were glue runs everywhere. That's a red flag." It was also later revealed that OceanGate used recycled structural parts from one submersible in order to construct another. They reused domes, ceiling faces, acrylic parts, and portions of the interior of the vessel. Much of what was used to construct Titan was recycled. All of that was to save money and reduce costs of having to acquire new materials. A key issue with the structure of the Titan was the acrylic dome located at the bow of the Titan. It was only rated to travel to depths of 1,300 meters, or 4,265 feet, or about 0.8 of a mile. The Titan itself was allegedly rated for depths of more than 3,000 meters, or a little more than 9,800 feet, or 1.86 miles. So not even to the depths of the Titanic itself was the Titan rated to dive in their own unofficial rating, I guess. In order to prevent anyone raising concerns, certain employees were not allowed to see the depth ratings of these various parts because they would know immediately that the rating was far inadequate for where Titan was going to be diving to. Stockton also chose to not have the Titan classified or have the U.S. Coast Guard provide a certificate of inspection, which are both industry standards. Stockton's reasoning being that it was taking too long, it was costing too much money, it's ridiculous, and it stifles innovation. Stockton kept pressure on his engineers to hurry up with the design and construction, and it was Stockton himself who made the major decisions at every point, just to make sure nothing was questioned and nobody stood in his way. Anyone who took issue with anything that had to do with the design and construction of the Titan, those conversations took place with only Stockton in the room, behind closed doors, with no written record of the meeting or what was discussed or the nature of the disagreements. His lead engineer would later go on to tell the investigative board that he refused to do any of the commercial dives in the submersible that he and his engineering team designed and built because he did not trust Stockton or his marine operations team. In fact, Stockton wanted him to be the Titan's pilot, but he flat out refused, telling Stockton he was not getting in it. Stockton liked using buzzy words and catchy phrases like being in this industry to buck convention or to push boundaries and to not prioritize safety over the possibility of dying. You know, power phrases that sound like fun. Now, of course, Stockton Rush perished in his own Titan submersible on June 18th, 2023, so he isn't here to face the consequences of his reckless abandon, but he was never a man to mince words. He said the following at a 2022 conference that OceanGate was there to defy convention by commercializing submersible travel. He said, quote, "These conventional research subs that are out there, they were never meant to make money. They were meant to get out there and do cool stuff. Submersible certification programs are over the top in their rules and regulations, but they had nothing on carbon fiber. And I learned that when you're outside the box, it's really hard to tell how really far outside the box you are. And we were really pretty far out there." Yeah. Off into the great beyond out there now, huh? Stockton Rush was not defying convention. In fact, when I was writing this, I put in parentheses, who did Stockton Rush think he was? That was kind of like a note to myself. But what I said after that was, I was answering my own question. Stockton Rush was not defying convention. He was thumbing his nose at the entire industry and everything all the top experts, scientists, and engineers in the world had to say about what works and what doesn't work in underwater travel. So who the heck did Stockton Rush think he was, and what business did he have in the world of submersibles? Well, knowing how Stockton's story ends, it kind of sounds like he had no business messing around in this industry. I was joking when I quoted Stockton as having said, "Trust me, bro, I'm an engineer." I was joking, but not joking, you know? I mean, do cool stuff? Who says that? That's just about how serious it feels like Stockton took the industry as a whole. I actually don't know if he really ever said, "Trust me, I'm an engineer." I saw it more of like I think I saw it as a headline in an article or maybe even a meme. It actually should have been a bumper sticker on the back of Titan. And it's something that you'd actually hear a real engineer say because it's kind of funny. I did get the quote from an article about Stockton that summed up pretty much how I felt about the guy, Titan, OceanGate, and the life and death games that he was playing with people's lives. As this article is going to remind us, engineers would rarely put lives in danger on purpose. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Stockton's background, and then I'll share that article with you. So Stockton earned his Bachelor of Science in Engineering with a major in aerospace engineering at Princeton, and then he earned his MBA at Berkeley in 1989. While he was working on his MBA, he got a job for a short time at McDonnell Douglas as a flight test engineer for the F-15 program. After getting his MBA, Stockton was a venture capitalist in San Francisco with Peregrine Partners. He moved to Washington State in 1989 to oversee a company called Remote Control Technologies located in Kirkland, Washington. He was known to have built his own plane from a kit and later on his own submersible after he took up the hobby of scuba diving. The first time Stockton rode in a submarine was in 2006, and following that, his interest shifted from the skies to the ocean. Stockton wanted to purchase his own submersible, but because there were so few privately owned submersibles, he was unable to get one. So a London-based company offered to sell him the parts for a mini submersible that he could put together, that could be put together by anyone who could read and interpret its blueprints, which he did. It was 13 feet long and was able to dive to a depth of 10 meters or 33 feet. Even so, Stockton was still in the market of buying a submersible. He even tried to buy the submersible owned by Steve Fawcett after he died in 2007, but wasn't able to. So I wanted to stop here for a few and talk about Steve Fawcett. It's a little bit of a side note here on him. Well, maybe a lot of a bit. I had Steve Fawcett down somewhere on my list of dead, eccentric, rich adventurers to cover someday on the show, but I actually never got around to it. And then I kind of forgot about Steve Fawcett because it's really not that much of a mystery anymore, you know, but it was for a while back when he first vanished. As a reminder, Steve Fawcett, born in Tennessee but grew up in beautiful Garbage Grove, California. I'm just kidding. Garden Grove, California, is another foolhardy, thrill-seeking, rich dead guy that liked flying, sailing, and adventures. He was the first person to circumnavigate the globe nonstop in a hot air balloon and in a fixed-winged aircraft. ending up with a total of 5 world records for 5 nonstop flights around the world in a balloon, in a plane, and on water. In his lifetime, Steve set more than 100 records, and more than half of them still stood at the time of his death. And so on September 3rd, 2007, while piloting a light aircraft above the Great Basin Desert between California and Nevada, Steve disappeared. He had taken off in his single-engine Champion 8KCAB Super Decathlon light aircraft from the Flying M Ranch private airstrip, which is located in Smith Valley, Nevada. When he never came back, a search effort was initiated about 6 hours later. No emergency locator transmitter was giving off any signals, as they were designed to do in the event of a crash. However, it was an older transmitter that he had that had a reputation of failing to give a location signal after crashing. Steve had about enough fuel to fly for approximately 5 hours. He had gone out for a short flight and was thought to be scouting the surrounding areas for a land speed run that he was planning, but his wife said this was really just a pleasure trip. Steve didn't provide a flight plan to anyone, and he was not required to either. While the initial search for Steve was extensive and several other long-lost plane wrecks were actually found as a result of the search for him, Steve wasn't among the wrecked sites that were located. The search was massive and went on with the help of the NTSB and Google with their satellite imagery, help from Steve's friend, British entrepreneur Richard Branson, in order to examine Google's high-resolution images so that might help spot Steve's plane, as well as help from images developed from Amazon's newest technology at the time called Digital Globe. But within a week of Steve being lost, these tech companies were like, the entire area has been searched at least once, as they started to realize that they were looking at duplicate images at that point. Amazon kept up the search until the end of October, but the official search for Steve came to an end on September 19th, a little more than 2 weeks after he went missing. And that's why the story kind of stuck out to me, these mysterious disappearances and vanishings like this. In fact, I was just thinking about covering that missing Malaysian airline flight 370 because it's coming up in my suggested videos ever since I started looking at stuff on OceanGate. And I was like, God, I can't believe it's been more than a decade since that Malaysian airplane vanished. But anyway, back to Steve. It would be more than a year later when a hiker found 3 crumpled up ID cards in the eastern Sierra Nevada in California, about 65 miles or 100 kilometers from where Steve had taken off from. The items found belonged to Steve, one of them being his FAA card, his Soaring Society of America card, and $1,005 in cash. 2 days later, on October 1st, wreckage was spotted from the air, but it was located at an elevation of over 10,000 feet or 3,100 meters, about 750 yards away from where those documents and money were found. The wreckage was later confirmed to be Steve's. The site of the crash was on the western side of a volcanic ridge, about 300 feet below the crest of it. The terrain was very steep, forested with 40 to 60 foot pine trees, along with several boulders and outcrops and overgrown grassy areas. The ground search at first recovered bone fragments, but they were either not human or too small to test. At the end of October, 2 large human bones were found about a half mile from the crash site, along with tennis shoes that showed signs of animal activity. Later DNA testing revealed that the bones did belong to Steve. It was believed he died on impact, and it was perfectly normal for animals to mess with and move remains around. The NTSB report found that the plane crashed at such an elevation that it made it difficult to find. Because there were not any unusual weather patterns, it's believed that Steve's plane likely encountered downdrafts that exceeded the climbing abilities of the plane. So Steve was really trying to fly over these peaks that reached elevations of 13,000 feet, but his plane couldn't climb faster than the downdraft was pushing him back down into the ridge. Coupled with the high density altitude, He just couldn't clear that mountain range. And that's ultimately what happened. And I didn't know that until I actually looked back. But I do remember when they found the money and the cards back then in 2008. It was like a year later. So yeah, when Steve Fawcett died, Stockton tried to show up at the estate sale to get his hands on Steve's submersible. I tried to find out why he didn't acquire it, but the only thing I found online said that he didn't get it for various reasons, and when he tried after Steve's death, he was unsuccessful. It was around the same year Steve Fawcett died that Stockton Rush began to entertain the idea of launching his own submarine company. He got the idea in his head, the same way Elizabeth Holmes did with the idea of streamlining blood testing, that there could be a significant market for underwater tourism and that it would provide an alternative to the significant time and technical gear required for scuba diving. So what I'm hearing is Stockton felt like dedicating years of his life and pouring millions of dollars into constructing a submersible. That was his way to compete against the time, money, energy, and technical gear requirements for scuba diving. That was his solution to the complicatedness of scuba diving and scuba gear. So I don't scuba dive, so I did a little bit of checking. I see that you can get all the scuba gear that you need: mask, fins, wetsuit, regulator, buoyancy control device, weights, dive computer, and protection like gloves, a hood, and boots. You can buy a whole starter kit for under $100. And to actually go on a dive trip or guided scuba excursion is anywhere between $50 and $200 depending on the location and the dive site. There are all the ancillary costs too, such as travel, stay accommodations, boat fees, and insurance. So it's not going to break the bank if it's a fun hobby and a passion for somebody. But to get the chance to experience being in the ocean and going deeper than any scuba gear could ever allow you to go, and to stay dry along without all the fuss and time and technicalities of scuba diving, why not just hop into good old Stockton sub and stay warm and dry inside while you're at it? You might die, but hey, anything could happen scuba diving too. Like, you could be on your honeymoon on the Great Barrier Reef, scuba diving with your new husband, and he decides 11 days after marrying you that he's over it and he gets rid of you by cutting off your oxygen supply on your scuba tank, causing you to sink to the ocean floor while he swims himself to safety. By the way, that's a Killafornia Dreaming Patreon exclusive from January of 2020, the tale of diving and dying in the Great Barrier Reef, the story of Gabe and Tina Watson, just to refresh your memory. You can subscribe over there if you want to hear about it. My point being, and to quote Stockton himself, or to at least paraphrase, you could die just getting out of bed. If you want to stay safe, stay in bed. He also made another flippant comment about death that made headlines after Stockton imploded himself and 4 others. A show on the Discovery Channel was filming an episode of Expedition Unknown in May of 2021 when the journalist interviewing Stockton was asking questions about what if there was an emergency and they needed to surface quickly and had trouble connecting with its surface support ship. Stockton brought up the fact that Titan carries 4 to 5 days of oxygen. The journalist asked, what if they don't find you? And Stockton's answer to that? Quote, well, you're dead anyway, unquote. Stockton Rush had a very whatever attitude about human life. I'm not exactly sure where that comes from. Some creators call it hubris. Others call it psychopathy. Maybe that's what you get when you mix the two, is somebody like Stockton Rush. So that was the goal, to make deep underwater tourism as everyday and commonplace for the elites, just as Jeff Bezos, Richard Branson, and Elon Musk have made space travel. I did watch the Netflix documentary on the story, and you know, I might turn this episode into a multi-part series. I don't know. I'm going to jump back to Patreon after this. We'll see. If there's still some interest, if you guys want to talk about the documentary on Netflix in a separate episode, I'd be more than happy to put that together. Those take me a little bit longer. It's a long documentary too. But on that documentary, they interviewed a lot of people who worked for OceanGate at different times. It actually had a lot of new and different information, and we see and hear from a side of Stockton that really wasn't making it into the media prior to the production of the film. And I went into it not really caring too much for old Stockton, as it were, but I came away feeling like the guy was a bigger piece of shit than I initially thought he was. I actually did not think Stockton was a terrible person due to the fact that I believed he believed the submersible was impenetrable. If he really truly believed that and never thought in a million years that he'd implode himself and 4 others, then I would give him the benefit of the doubt and accept that he couldn't have known what was going to happen, and that if he did know it, we would assume that he wouldn't put his own life on the line either. It's hard to believe that Stockton was that stupid. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that there are certain truths that don't need further testing, and the weight of the pressure of 2 miles below sea level is one of them. And Stockton Rush was literally a rocket scientist with his degree in aerospace engineering. But I also know that just because you're a rocket scientist doesn't mean that you can transfer that knowledge and intelligence to a whole different area of science, which is what Stockton's own brand of logic had him believing. Just because you're smart doesn't mean you won't do stupid things. The documentary really showcases just how many times Stockton was told that he can't make a carbon fiber submersible that will withstand ocean pressure at the depths of the Titanic wreckage. He was told over and over, year after year, time and again. And his answer was to eliminate anyone who challenged him and to hire newly minted college graduates to indoctrinate instead. Very, very Theranosy of him. So another thing that I learned when I watched that documentary without giving too much of it away is the fact that Stockton Rush had absolutely zero income stream for OceanGate. Stockton himself came from wealth, and I don't know how well he did as a venture capitalist, and well, we know how well he did as far as his dreams of being a pilot, and instead of sticking with what he knew and went to school for, he turned to an industry he had absolutely no technical background, training, knowledge, or education in. So what are you called when you're trying to find work in a field you have no business being in? Probably unemployed. It's like if I went to college for 10 years to become an attorney and I go on LinkedIn and apply for jobs as a lumberjack. That's basically what Stockton did. He went to school to be a rocket scientist, graduated, and went and applied to be an oceanographer. So Stockton was literally funding this mess all himself, although he did at various times have investors and rallied to earn money in that way as well. Which explains why the cheaping out and the corner cutting was happening. At certain points in time when he needed money, he tried to do what Lizzie Holmes did and what she was able to do very effectively, which was to procure investors. And not just your ordinary everyday venture capitalists this woman was getting. She was getting big names and big corporations, big investment firms, big venture capitalists, and notable public, military, and or political figures. I don't know if Stockton ever tried to squeeze investors for large amounts of funding, but he was able to convince a few people, but he might have been hesitant to bring too many people in who might get too close to figuring out that he was building death traps, basically. It was probably easier to convince people blood testing could be scaled down to a device the size of an air fryer, and the big selling point being that you could run your daily blood tests while warming up your morning spinach frittatas. That was probably easier than convincing people that they get to ride on Stockton's magic school bus down to the Titanic and make it back without becoming ocean floor sediment. Another reason why Stockton may not have wanted too many investors is because he wanted to be the one with a claim on creating the first and only, or being the first and only person with a Titanic tourism business, and didn't want to share in the glory with anyone. That sounds about the lane Stockton wanted to be in. The documentary used a term that I don't like at all, and some of you might be the same with it, but I'll say it once and I won't say it again. He aspired to be at the level of what he referred to as a big swinging dick, like Branson, Bezos, and Musk. He wanted to be one of them. Like I said, I don't like that term, so if I have to say it again, and considering we are talking about Stockton Rush, I probably will. It's inevitable. I will say BSD. But Stockton had quite a hill to climb since those guys are billionaires many, many times over. And while being worth $25 million is a lot of wealth and nothing to sneeze at, it is a drop in the bucket in comparison. If Stockton could pull this venture of his off, he would quite possibly could have made it to the level of those guys. But whether it was Stockton not wanting to bring too many other people in, or there just wasn't any interest in it, Stockton's idea was to eventually be able to use the tourism business to help fund the development of innovative deep ocean submersible vessels that would help boost future commercial underwater ventures such as disaster mitigation and mining for natural resources. As Stockton took the idea of commercial submersible tourism and ran with it, he eventually realized why nobody had done it before. It was simply too dangerous. And because of that, the regulatory specifications and requirements became so out of reach when it came to putting paying members of the public on a submersible and sending them 2 miles down into the ocean safely and making it out of reach for 99.9% of us that are just the average members of the public, poor, paycheck to paycheck. What Stockton was doing was he wasn't listening to the reasons for the speculation and the fears and the regulations. He refused to accept that taking more than 1 or 2 people that far underwater in an oblong-shaped vessel on a budget is not humanly possible. And you know what? It might not ever be. And it's likely that none of us are going to live to see the day. And even then, some might be like, well, with the right amount of money, no, not even then, because what it would take to build a submersible large enough and strong enough would make it cost prohibitive. As I've gone through the articles and documentaries about OceanGate, the cost of building submersibles varies so much depending on its capabilities. We know that Stockton was Mickey Mousing this Titan together, and it shows. If you look at actual close-up photos of Titan, and not the computer-generated images that OceanGate put out there, it looks like it was bought at some bargain basement used submersible vehicle lot. It's been said that Titan cost around $10 to $12 million to build. By comparison, a SpaceX rocket costs about $90 million to build. Elon hopes to eventually be able to whittle the cost down to about $10 million, with a goal of one day the average billionaire, if they want, can opt to trade in their private jet for a private rocket, because why not? So Stockton founded OceanGate with a partner named Guillermo Solnlin. He has an interesting website. I looked at it for this episode, and one of the things listed on Guillermo's personal website alongside his time at OceanGate is his aim of establishing human life in Venus's atmosphere by 2050. So someone just about as like-minded as Stockton Rush was, with a lot of interesting ambition. So next up, I'm going to go through a timeline of the various milestones OceanGate achieved during this time, and we are going to get to it in a second part because I've reached about an hour and a half into this episode, and I am just about halfway through my notes. So another hour and a half is just kind of long for one recording. So I'll go ahead and end this story here. When we get back, we'll go through the beginnings of OceanGate and how they ended up where they ended up in the summer of 2023. I want to thank you all so much for listening. I'm going to go ahead and upload this, and I will find time this week to record the second half. I have it all written. In fact, I started recording this morning, and I was listening to some of it when I got back from work because we're only open from 10 to 2 on Sundays. but I sound really tired, and I was tired this morning. I'm a little bit more energetic now. I wish I could finish it now, but I have other things that I gotta attend to for the rest of my Sunday. But anyways, stay tuned. I will be back very soon with the second half of this episode. I'm going to spend some time this week. One of these mornings, I'm going to go into work late, and I will record this for you guys. All right. Thank you all so much for listening. I hope you're enjoying this story. I really, really enjoyed writing this episode. So I'm so happy to be able to finally share it with you. Thank you for listening, and I will be back very soon. And as always, take care, be safe, and sweet dreams.